In the previous video, I ended up going over the character, how to kind of work with it and tune some settings and just kind of see what all it provides. So we covered, same thing with the firearm. We covered all the options, what they do and all that kind of stuff, as well as I went ahead and did a brief overview of all the functions and all that fun stuff that you have access to. So as you can see, here's a list of the functions, how I call them. I have this just big example list. And then I have stuff related to the weapon customizer as well, just so you can kind of see how that works, which I'll do a brief touch over, but it's relatively simple for what it is, thanks to the attachment system that I went ahead and made. So I know I said we were going to talk about attachments in the next video, but I'm going to actually save that for the end. And the reason because is once I get on the subject of the attachments, it's going to be kind of like a big rabbit hole where it's just going to kind of keep going, because there is a good amount of attachments and things that you can do to set up really your own stuff very easily. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and discuss projectiles and my own physical materials and kind of show you how they work together. So starting with the projectiles, you can ignore the debug. I have actually stripped that out, but basically all it did was I might put it back in for submission, but basically it just draws a debug square one in the or debug box when you hits an impact. But you have your own drag curve that you can use to simulate drag or air resistance, whatever you want to call it. It can be affected by wind based on this checkbox. So like if you have things like this wind component, you can make it so that'll affect the wind. So when the projectile spawns, it picks up this information, and on tick it gets affected. Then we have the velocity of the projectile and the bullet weight in grains. Now, you are not locked down to using my projectile. That was a big reason why I actually stripped out the firing logic and reloading logic from my system itself and just gave you an example on how to use it. So that way you can use things like easy ballistics and all that kind of stuff in place of my own projectiles. But I just want to go ahead and do a brief overview of what all mine has. And I don't even know if I do have some functions in here. So you can ignore those again. I'll be covering those because they're related to the physical material. But we have the get projectile movement component, get wind source, and then calculating the impact force and projectile power, which these I was using previously for actually figuring out the hit force as well as the recoil impulse that the projectile should add to the firearm. Okay, once we have that all kind of handled, let's go ahead and discuss the actual physical materials, because that's what triggers these effects. So as you can see, there's the impact normals, and this spawns through the actual particles. So if we head over to assets, we can come over here to physical materials, and here I just have two examples that are wood, and they are derived from my physical material class. And what they do is we have two sections. So one's for projectile, one's for character. And this is where you would set up your own kind of effects to be played. So they're like impact effects. So if for projectiles, you have your impact effect, which is just this Niagara system right here that spawns just a couple wood-like looking kind of particles around. And then you have the impact decal, which is just a simple material that I went ahead and made that contains a normal map that I was done in GIMP, and then the amazingly horrible opacity map also done in GIMP because I'm a really good artist. And we have the decal size. So this is the size that you can use to display the decal on whatever surface you hit. You have the lifetime of the decal. So once it spawns, it'll be killed after 8 seconds. And then you have the impact sound. So I can play whatever one of these that I want whenever the projectile hits that physical material. So each physical material will have its own unique setup, so to speak, and it'll be very easy to call and trigger it. Now the character settings, they're the exact same. You have the effects, the decal size, lifetime, and the impact sound. So this is where you do things like your footsteps. If it's dusty, like on maybe like a very, very dry beach or something like that, you would maybe kick up a little bit of dust. And same thing for the impact decal. You would place down boot prints or something like that, depending on the material itself that you are working with. Now, on top of that, when we actually go through and handle these, so I'll look at it in the projectile. On projectile impact, I use a function here that handles that for us. So I went ahead and made a little static library that I guess over time it'll probably be expanded on a little bit more. But basically it spawns the projectile impacts, and you also have spawn, what was it? Spawn character. Can't remember what it was called. Yeah, spawn footstep impact effects. So this would be things like when you perform your line trace to sweep for physical materials when you're doing your animation, like at the point of each step hitting the ground, you would fire the line trace normally, and then you would spawn the effects based on that. Instead of having like a giant switch statement, for example, that would kind of be annoying to do and doing a bunch of different branches out from that, you instead can just simply call my function here, pass in any actor that you need to, because I have to get a world reference like that. You would pass in that hit result, which contains the sweep material, and then you would, if you want the size to be bigger or smaller, multiply it based on this value. So for example, if I wanted the impacts effects to be pretty big, I would just multiply by 10. And as you can see, that effect got really big. I'm just going to put it back, I think it was like 2.5 or something like that. So that's how you handle that. I just want to do again, cover the physical materials because they do have a use, they do have a purpose. And if you like go through mine, it'll just be a little bit easier for handling things like that. So like for example, concrete, that spawns a different particle effect. That would spawn a different decal if I had went ahead and made one. And same thing, like you would have a bunch of different kind of parameters being used for those effects. And over time, as I implement more things, if I find more stuff that needs to actually use it, I will go ahead and do so. And same thing goes. So I plan on eventually, again, this is not a priority though for this feature, some form of grenades. I want to have grenades that explode and kind of give all the proper effects, and then have some damage events that fire off, so that way you can override and add your own logic into them as well. So again, it's all just kind of a work in progress here, but it would use the same physical material to figure out which effects that it needs to, well, handle. So if it spawns right here in the dead center, it's going to spawn only the concrete. If it lands right here in this corner, well, then it's going to spawn concrete and some wood effects as well, and that kind of thing. So that's kind of the plan for the physical materials and how I want them to be handled. But anyways, I'm just kind of rambling on and on at this point, so I will see you in the next video when we cover something else. So I'll see you then.